fantastic pixel castle Q&A dissertation. I don't know. I'm just going to go through everything that they answered really quickly and give you an overview of the hour-long stream in probably like 6 minutes. We'll see how fast I get through this. Before we get into the questions, I just want to start out with the general idea that Mr. Ghostcrawler started out with. And they said they want you to enjoy this game for maybe decades. So they're thinking about the long haul there. And they are in early development, so there's nothing that is final, especially the art and the ideas are not final. They do love how WoW dungeons and raids work, so don't expect a lot of change there. And there are things that the adventure MMO style hasn't aged well with, so they want to improve on that. So the ideas of having adventure and fantasy is a focus for them to improve on. And then they wanted to talk about red shards again, which are your traditional MMO feel and like timeless isles from WoW. And then blue shards are kind of your solo survival game like feel. I understand survival game idea isn't really what you might be looking for in an MMO, but I'm just trying to calculate the idea of here's a solo instance that you can build with your friends. And that's kind of the idea they want you to focus on. And the gameplay loop is focusing on kind of jumping back and forth between these red and blue shards, where your blue shards, if you like deplete a mine in it, it's permanent, it's gone forever, but you'll get another blue shard, where your red shards are your traditional MMO type of things, and they want to make something that is mysterious and worthy of your time. That's the gist that he started out with. Now going through all of the questions, and they want to say like classes and factions, how are they going to work in the game? And they are going to be classes and factions and all those things, but they are not restricting your play. They're specifically there for depth. So there will be certain faction wars that work against each other, but it doesn't matter what faction you're on. It's there for the depth of the stories. Then they ask, will there be tanks in your game and how many? And they basically didn't allude to how many tanks there will be, but they did say they kind of want to revisit how tanks work, and they're kind of experimenting with it. Do they always have to take aggro, or do they only have aggro in certain moments? Are they experimenting with things, or how are they approaching this? So they kind of wanted to revisit how the tanking genre works. Will the game treat you like a hero? That's the next question. And they alluded to Destiny and how it's like you're this special person in this universe, but the weight of the universe is not on your shoulders. You are elite, but you're definitely not the chosen one. They don't want you to feel like you are the sole protagonist in the journey. Now, what are the reasons between red and blue shards? Blue shards is kind of for variety and for shared progression with your friends, and you can experiment with this a lot and experiment and change how things are. And this is where they get to change up how the formula works, and red shards, how the traditional MMO formula is. So that's their ability to explore and experiment with content. Now they want to talk about support in UI mods. Is it going to be the Final Fantasy approach where mods are bad, or the WoW approach? And how they definitely talked about this was they don't want combat modifying mods like in WoW. I don't have experiments with that, but such mods of like that will do the fight for you, they are definitely looking to avoid. But they really do like accessibility mods, which means like you can have different customized UI settings or allow people with disabilities play the game. They really like those things, and they talked about that a lot. The one thing they did focus on when asked this question is they want you to be able to get the game and play the game right away without the need for add-ons, so that if someone's coming down the line and they get the game to play, they don't have to have their friend walk them through how to download 80 mods and then the game's good. They want to avoid that altogether. Next, I wanted to talk about the optimization at the expense of social decency. Basically, they want the game to fit into your life. They don't want to feel like you have to optimize everything. They don't want to make it feel like this game is your life. You don't need to play all the time to be engaged. You can if you want to, but it doesn't have to be your life. They are really against the idea that, hey, this is a game, this is the only game you play. They think that's an outdated formula. They don't think it should be good that you're playing the game all the time. And they really talked about how that's outdated thought and how player engagement is focusing rather as a stakeholder, but as a player. So more on that question in a little bit as it ties to another question. But the next question they asked was combat. How is this going to be? Is it going to be a hybrid approach like Guild Wars 2? We talk tab targeting, and it was kind of a dual threat question, kind of how they approached this, as they want it to be for PC and for mouse and keyboard. They didn't talk about console at all, but they did also say that they want it to be played on a controller as well. And they kind of talked about tab targeting and soft lock targeting because it applies to both mouse and keyboard, but they kind of are looking at a hybrid approach and how to make it easier to be able to be played on a controller. So there's not a solid answer there. In the terms of combat, they did talk a lot about like Shadows of Mordor and Assassin's Creed and ways to make combat more interesting and a real-time combat, kind of like how Final Fantasy 16 is, taking their times. And how do we integrate this in and mix up the traditional MMO experience? Onto art style, they're exploring the look of the game. It's probably not going to be too stylized or cartoony, but also won't be ultra realistic either. And it's going to be third person. I think that's a big key hit. It's going to be third person and not isometric. So they did basically confirm that. Cross servers and how cross server progression and being able to play with your friends is going to work. Basically, they want you to be able to play with your friends at any time. That's a key focus for them, to being able to play with anyone from anywhere without it having to have ping locks and all that stuff. So that's kind of how they answered that question. Concern on the NetEase backing, and they kind of just talked about how there will not be any pay for power progression in the game. There could be microtransactions, but they figured it's going to be you pay for a box or you pay for a subscription. They want players to feel good about spending their money. Number of classes, I know this is something a lot of people are going to care about, and they said they talked anywhere about 20 to 50, and they used the example as rat catcher. So if you hear that term in the future, rat catcher is basically, how can I talk about class without saying anything? So if you hear that term in the future, that's what they're talking about. But they want you to be able to experience a lot of classes and play a lot of classes. And they don't want to feel like a class has every single role in mind. So you can play a rat catcher that's a tank, a healer, support, DPS, whatever. But they want you to be able to integrate these with your alts and have everything feel unique to it. And they did kind of caveat off of this and go, hey, there's maybe an idea where you can play an alt and then switch to a different character in the middle of the raid. So they don't want that to be the idea of it. They want you to have fun with it. They want to have the classes to feel unique to themselves and not feel like they fill every single role and just kind of go off on a whim, and you can basically do it all. Races. They basically want there to not feel like, hey, we're taking the Lord of the Rings and transporting it into our game. They want to make things that are original to their game. So will there be elves? Yes, but well, maybe there might not be elves, but whatever they make, there is going to be unique to their world. They're not going to feel like, hey, I have Lord of the Rings, elves, and dwarves in my game. It's going to be, we have ghost elves in our game. Now, engine, they are using Unreal Engine, so keep that in mind. And caveating off of that is, how are we going to do anti-cheat and bots? I don't know what Unreal Engine has about like anti-cheat and bots, but that is something they're focusing on. They want to keep the integrity of the game solid. And as much as they would love for people to want to data mine their game, they are going to try to make it so they can't. So you can keep the integrity of the game if you want to have certain story moments experienced and just have huge integrities in the game, whether it be people farming content or data mines or whatever. They want to keep it as integral as possible. Also going off of that, they did expand that they want the game to be released in every region all at the same time, and that's their plan. Now they talk about leveling and characters, and how it's going to work. Is it going to be like WoW, or is it going to be like Final Fantasy 14? And if you don't know the differences on those, it's going to be, is a character tied to a class, or do you have one character and then you can play a bunch of different alts or classes on that one character? And they said they really like how Final Fantasy has it set up where you have one character and you can play a lot of classes very easily, but they do think a character should be tied to a class, but they want to make it very easy to be able to play multiple characters and multiple classes. They want you to focus on you, yourself, the player, as the progression and not the character. And they don't want to have a funnel approach where you have 6 characters feeding into one character. They would rather you have one character that feeds into other characters. So basically a upside down funnel, or a waterfall effect, like the champagne glasses where you pour in the top glass and it feeds down to everything else. That's kind of how they want to have it. And they want it this way because, hey, if I want to have a tank, maybe I want my tank to be a super burly, big warrior dude. And if I have a healer, maybe they're a scholar and they sit in the library. Your characters can have an identity to them where you can feel like I am this character, but then not have the progression of, hey, I have one character and he doesn't really have an identity, but he can play all of these classes. They really like the idea of tying an identity to a character and then making it easier to have lots of characters rather than having a bunch of progression where you have to redo the story over and over and over again. So that's their take on that, which I really do like. PvP, all we know is that it's going to exist. It's going to be open world focused to start. Maybe they'll be ranked later down the line, but probably not at launch. They're more focused on open world structure of PvP rather than having all of these structured game modes and stuff. Accessibility, going up to the UI supports and stuff, they want to have a lot of accessibility, and that's something they care about, but it's very hard to commit to having all these accessibility options, but it's something they are focused on. Now, Ghostcrawler specifically talked about this one and how is time commitment going to be in your game. And he said something that I was very interesting, as in dailies and weeklies are low value content. They're there because they're easy and keeps people engaged. And that's not necessarily something that they are really caring about. They're going to have chapter based content, and you get this chapter, and when you're done with it, you can be done with it. And you're done, you can come back for the next one, or they're going to give you reasons to keep playing the games rather than, hey, I have to log on every single day to complete my dailies and my weeklies. And they also said that the weekly reset model is kind of outdated. So maybe they're exploring ways of, removing the weekly raid lockout that so many MMOs have. And you'll be able to feel proud of the time that you invested, but you won't necessarily have to come in every single week to do your raids. And if you miss a week, it's the end of the world, which I think is a very interesting approach. And I actually really appreciate that. We'll see what it ends up panning out to be. Next, a highly controversial topic is AI and how will it be used. And they said they will not be using AI to make art or possibly ever plagiarize someone else's work. They think that is very bad, and they think it should be in the hands of the artist to create the world and not AI. However, they did say there are things with machine learning and procedural generated, like blue zones, for example, that make tools and make creating these zones easier for people. So they aren't necessarily against using AI altogether. That is something that I can understand as someone who works with it a little bit, as in, hey, we can have AI identify that we have these 50 blue zones and 40 of them were never played because they're not fun. So let's make more zones like the 10 that everyone played. And then AI identifies that and then gives you useful feedback on how you can make zones better. So definitely will not be stealing or plagiarizing any art. I think that should be the focus of what they are talking about. Now, partnering with players and how you intend to do it. Basically, they said they're going to overshare content. They're going to do a lot of podcasts. They're doing interviews with streamers. They want to give you lots of ways to give feedback. They want to have people be treated as gamers and peers and not feel like you're a stakeholder and we're only here for your money. So they're intending on how they're going to partner with their players. Now, they talked about avoiding tropes like elves versus orcs and all of that. They want to explore the gray area, essentially. They want you to feel like you understand why the villain is this way and maybe have a hero making some weird choices, but you can't avoid tropes altogether because that is essentially what storytelling is. It's very hard to create super original things without tropes, but this is where that gray or walking the line, that gray area is, and this is the areas they want to focus on. Next, they talk about solo players and do you have them in mind? And the answer to that was, hey, we created blue shards, which means you can experiment and do everything that you want in this area, in this blue shard. This is yours, but there's going to be things in the game that you can't explore as a solo player. You will have to be teamed up with other people, but you won't necessarily have to have friends to do all of them. You can do it completely solo. For example, a world boss, you can't solo a world boss, but you alone can be in the area doing the world boss and not having to rely on finding a group to do it. Other people will show up. They want to explore leaderboards too, so maybe you can have that content in mind as a solo player. Hey, my sole goal is to be on the leaderboard. I don't need a lot of people to do this. I could just climb the leaderboard. And they want to make it easy for players to find friends if you are a solo player, but you want to play with people. That's kind of how they answered that question. To me, I think they're really focusing on the MMO aspect of being able to play with people rather than this is a solo game. I think it's going to be, this is a game you can play solo, but here are all the things of how we're going to make it easier for a solo player to play with other people. That was kind of my take on it. Now, everyone should be able to do everything, or are you going to be catering to hardcore players? That was the question. And they think exclusivity is cool. They think it's called peacocking, where, hey, I got this really unique weapon and this really cool weapon, and you can show it off. And they think that's really cool. And that's a very interesting approach compared to a lot of other games that I'm seeing now, where it's, hey, every player, whether you're casual or hardcore, should be able to have everything. They want there to be exclusive things. They want you to feel proud of having these things. They want you to feel special and be able to compare to other players and aspects that are not just, hey, my DPS is really good. So that's kind of the end of all of this. They did talk about there'll be playtesting and feedback on their website if that's something that you're looking for. But that was definitely not 6 minutes of run through TDLR of the Ask Me Anything from Greg Street's new fantastic Pixie Castle studio. There'll be more in the future and I'll be covering it more in the future, but that's all for this video. I hope you have a great day.